Hello, this is a video about the 3VC switch from AE Modular. This module is a very interesting module that I haven't seen in UREC or any other system before. It is basically 3 switches that can be voltage controlled. So I'll just go over the ins and outs and the controls, and after that I will show you a few patch ideas. Now it's really important to understand that the switch doesn't have a direction. It is rather bidirectional. You can go either way. You can put an input into this and then you switch between 2 different outputs, or you can have 2 different inputs on this side, and with the switch you can change whether A or B goes out here. For each switch you have an IO1, and an A and a B. So again, this can be an input or an output, and these can be inputs or outputs. The gate per switch means that if a gate is high on this, it will output B. If the gate is low, it will always output A. So again, if the gate is low, then either the A input is coming out of the 1, or if you go the other way, whatever comes into IO1 here will go via the A output. If the gate is high, it will go via the B route. And you have the same 3 times, so IO1 and gate 1, IO2 and gate 2, IO3 and gate 3, and these are completely independent from each other. So you can choose one this way, like input and 2 outputs. So these 3 switches are completely independent of each other. You also have, for convenience sake, a plus 5 volt output and the bus gate. So if you have a MIDI keyboard attached and you press a key, then you could use this to open one of the switches. Now there isn't a multiple, so if you wanted to open all the 3 switches at the same time with a bus gate, you would have to go and maybe find a multiple from a neighboring module like this one. Now the controls. For each of the switches, which you can see here 1, 2 and 3, you have a latch button and a moment button. So the latch button means that if you press that, it will change the output or the A or B route and keep it that way. So latch on this will switch it to B and it will stay on B. Press the latch again, it will stay on A. And this is again completely independent for each switch. The MMT button is a momentary switch. So when I press that here, you can see as long as I press it, the B route is going, and when I let it goes straight back to A. Now it's important to understand that the switch works on gates, not on triggers. So if you would apply a trigger, it would go very quickly, just like that. So for some applications, that is a very short time. So it would be better to have a gate like a square wave LFO, or again the gate for a MIDI keyboard where you hold down a note to really change that, because you want to press it and hold to get more through the B. So you have those for each of the switches, and of course you have the LEDs that show you whether the A or the B route is currently selected. Just be aware that it's really up to you to understand and to change and to remember whether the A and B are inputs or outputs. But please do not mix it, so it does take a little bit of care. So you don't want an output from A and then an input from B, and then, you know, the I/O just gets confused. So you really have to be really careful in how you patch it up. So this is how the switch works. Now I will show you a few patch ideas. Okay, so this is the first patch. In this patch I have an oscillator going into the input of the VC switch. So this I/O is now an input. And the oscillator will then go to 2 different outputs, to the A or the B output. The A output goes to the Nile filter. and the output of the null filter goes into my mixer into the channel 1. The B output of the switch goes to the wasp filter, and the output of the wasp filter goes into mixer channel 2. Also, the wasp filter and the null filter are being modulated from two envelopes that are in self-looping mode, so they act as LFOs. That just means that the cutoff frequency goes, lower and higher, just depending on those envelopes. The gate output is being controlled by a square wave from this LFO, which is in slow, and it's going quite, not very fast. So what happens is when you turn on just one of the filters, like this, so this is because the output of A is rhythmically going on and off, so the filter gets an input only when the A is on. Similarly, the wasp filter is only getting an input if it's on B. So you can hear the filters have different characteristics, so you have a slight variation in sound if you turn them on both at the same time. And now I just turn on the multi-effects, just give it a little bit of a reverb. You can also play with the cutoff frequency. This was just a small example of what you can do to get some rhythmic variations with just one oscillator, and there's no sequencer involved and no keyboard, just switching between two different filters and modulating them in different ways. So this next patch is a little bit more elaborate, and I'm not sure about the musical quality of it, just wanted to show the other way around. So what's happening in this patch is that I have an I/O. In this case, it is an output. So what happens is that the output of the I/O on this first switch is controlling the pitch, the CV of this VCO over here. And the VCO then goes into the state variable filter, and the low pass of the state variable filter goes into my mixer, and the mixer goes into the multi-FX unit, and then it goes into the audio interface. But what happens to the pitch? So there are two different pitches going on. In the A section of the switch, I have this cable that's coming from my 4-at mix. And what's happening here is that using the setting in which this level of the first channel is not part of the mix, but I'm using the output of it. So I'm using the attenuator only. I'm patching in the plus 5 volt that's coming from the module into the input. And with the attenuator, I can dial in a static pitch or static control voltage. Now look here that I've used the switch to switch it into DC mode. So now I'm not outputting an audio signal, but I'm outputting a control voltage, and I'm choosing a level between 0 and 5 volt. Turning it all the way to the left would be 0 volt, and I have it somewhat higher pitched. So that means that the channel or the selection number A on the switch is always getting the same note or the same pitch. The B route of the switch, however, comes from the output of my sequencer 16. So this will change. And it will change with, I have a clock here that is coming from my trick 164. And at the moment, it's every step that sets the clock. And that is the same clock as the gate for the switch. So you can see here that the trick 164 is clocked by this LFO here, and the output of the trick 164 is providing the gate for the switch and also the clock for the sequencer 16. So every time one of these steps is active, the sequencer 16 goes to the next step, and also the switch switches to the B. So let's listen to that. Now you can hear very clearly that there's always this one static note, and it only switches between the deeper notes on the sequencer 16. I can change that static note. Without changing the steps on the sequencer. So this was how it was before. Now, just to make things more interesting, not only to make things more interesting, I chose a glitch delay on the multi-effects, and I'm using this cable to control the parameter 2, but basically there's a LFO over here that is in triangle wave mode and just slowly passes through that parameter 2, and it gives it a little bit of more movement. So just listen to that. I think it sounds quite funky. Well, enough of that. So that was just an example how to go the other way. So in this patch, there's a little bit more going on. So I wanted to use in the gate an audio rate signal. So not only can you switch it on macro rhythmically with an LFO or a gate from the keyboard, but you can actually also get an audio rate signal in and create completely different waveforms. So this is what happens in this patch here. I'm using this VCO and I'm using the square wave, and I'm putting the square wave into the gate of my switch. In this case, I'm using two input signals and I'm switching between the two to create one output signal that goes here into the WASP filter, and from the WASP filter into the mixer in channel 1, and again through the multi-FX module. Now, what are these two input signals though? So here, as you can see in number A, I'm coming from the first oscillator on my 2 OSCD, which is a sawtooth wave. And the second is going to this multiple here, and I'm having to use a multiple because although the sawtooth has 2 outs, a square wave only has 1 out, and I wanted to post the square wave of the second oscillator into the channel B here, but also in channel 3, so you can hear them separately. So using those multiples is very convenient, but it also complicates the patch where there shouldn't be a complication. Branch A gets a sawtooth wave from the first oscillator, and channel B gets a square wave from the second oscillator, and they are pitched in different frequencies. So you can see here the channel A is pitched fairly high and channel B is pitched fairly low. Let's see what the sawtooth oscillator sounds like by itself. And this is the square wave oscillator 2. And this is how they sound both together when you just mix them. So you can hear that I've pitched them in a way that they somehow resonate with each other and they're not too far apart, and they have a nice kind of ambient drone to them, which is okay just by mixing. But now let's listen to what they sound both together when we use the VC switch. This doesn't sound like much, and that is because I have the frequency fairly low, so it is actually still in LFO territory. And the pulse width can actually select the mix between the two. So if I turn the pulse width all the way to the left, I'm getting more of oscillator 2. And if I turn it all the way to the right, you can see that on the LEDs here as well. So I get a lot more yellow, which is oscillator 2. And when I'm turning it to the right, the pulse width, then I'm getting no oscillator 2 and only oscillator 1. So in a way, the pulse width modulation on the square wave oscillator becomes a mixing switch. So these should be fairly equal now. Now the real magic happens when you turn up the frequency of the square wave. So now you can hear that I'm getting a new waveform, not too dissimilar from the mixed signal. So let's listen to that again. But of course, the signal coming out of the switch is going through the wasp filter, and the wasp filter is adding a lot of resonance and beauty to it. So I can change the frequency a little bit more. Making a little bit more gritty, and then I can adjust the pulse width modulation again, and the pulse width again. Now what's really cool is the pulse width can also be modulated, and this is an inception moment where we're having an oscillator modulating two waveforms using a switch, and now I can use an LFO to modulate the modulator. So let's see how that looks like. So I just increased the modulation depth. So you can see here this LFO is in the mod input on the VCO, and I've switched that switch from modulating to PWM to pulse width modulation, and then I turn the modulation signal up. And I'm getting a good rhythmical motion in the sound. I'm going to adjust the frequency a bit more. Now we go into the next stage of inception, and we turn up the rate of the LFO that's modulating the pulse width. And increasing the modulation depth. And now, the next level of inception, I'm turning the LFO into audio range. So that was just a little bit of playing around with the various frequencies and the modulations and various levels of inception where things get modulated that are modulating other things. And of course using the VC switch, using a audio rate switch. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that has given you a few ideas on how to use the VC switch. And if you have other ideas on how to use it, please let me know in the comment section. I would be very interested to see what you guys are doing with it. And also, there has been a patch challenge on the forum using the VC switch, and I will link to that again in the description below. So there were a few other examples on how to use that and some real compositions. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe and like my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.